Okay, welcome everybody. We are on Parsha Devorim. That is the fifth book in the five books of Moses. And this is a book that Moses wrote. Now, what does that mean he wrote? It was his own words. It sounds crazy for a Jew who believes that the five books of Moses came from God to say that these are Moses' own words. So how do I explain it? That these are the words that God agreed to. So Moses did say these words. And God decided, based on Moses' own words, what should and what should not be put in the book. Okay? Now, this is also taking place 5 weeks before Moses' death, the last month or whatever. So he is going to give rebuke. He's going to give rebuke. We're going to discuss why is it important. Why do you think it's important to give rebuke before one dies? And we'll see. So, I don't want to give it away. I want us to work it out. Okay. So it starts off, if we look at the verse, these are the words that Moses spoke to, it says, all Israel on the other side of the Jordan, concerning the wilderness, concerning the Arava, opposite the Sea of Reeds, between a place called Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Chazerot, and a place called Dizahav. 11 days from Horeb, by the way of Mount Sinai, Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Then verse 3 says, it was in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first of the month, when Moses spoke to whom? What does it say? It says, children of Israel. Now, one second. I copied this idea down and I circled it. The first verse says that these are the words that Moses spoke to whom? All Israel. Then in verse 3 it says, Moses spoke to the children of Israel. Okay, guys, you may not be bothered by this, but it bothered the Kliyakar. And if we have to take note that he knows Hebrew, he knows the scripture, he knows the Bible much better, and this should have alarms going off, guys, just nod to me if alarms are going off in your head. Great. So first thing he points out, first of all, let me give you some background. Many of these places don't even exist in the five books of Moses, or let's say the previous 4 books. They're not mentioned. So what are they? Some of them are real places, and even if they're real places, the basic idea is that Moses is giving rebuke, and he's giving it in a way of hinting. He's using the place to remind them of the sins that took place at the time when they were in those locations. Okay, so let's go through the Kliyakar. These are the words that Moses spoke to whom? All of Israel. Now, the Kliyakar right away says, we don't find the words all Israel or that Moses spoke to all of Israel except in one other place. But before he gets to that, he wants to give us the shock of a lifetime. We don't find in all of the Torah that Moses is speaking to all of the Jewish people at once, all of Israel at once, because is it really possible for one person to speak to 3 million people?
Why not?
Why not? They didn't have microphones. And he says, we don't find this language anywhere in the Torah except one other place. So here and in Parshat Hakel. Did you know that it's a mitzvah for the king, to speak and read Parshat, not just Parshat Devorim, the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, to all the people who come to Yerushalayim. So that's all the men, and of course they bring their children, which is a big mitzvah too, and their wives. They read the whole book of Deuteronomy. When? Are you aware of when this takes place? It's after the sabbatical, after the Shemitah year, during Sukkot. So in other words, it's already in the 8th year, or the first year of the next 7-year cycle. There are 7-year cycles. 6 years we till the ground, we work the ground. The last year, the 7th year, we lay the land fallow, and all the laws of Shemitah apply. So in the beginning of the 8th year following Shemitah, during Sukkot, the king sits on the Har Bayit and reads this book to everyone who comes. And if you look in chapter 31, which should be number 2 on your source sheet, if I'm not mistaken. So you'll find that on page 2, it's source 2, is Deuteronomy 31, 11 through 13. It's really 11 because it says, you shall read this Torah before all Israel in their ears. So in Hebrew, it's very important to hear it. Tikra et Torah hazot, right? The king is supposed to read. You shall read this Torah. Neged, we're going to focus on this word neged, Kol Yisrael. So we do find the language of speaking to Kol Yisrael. Otherwise, you find the words Bnei Yisrael, all of Bnei Yisrael. But where do you say Kol Yisrael? Only here. And where do you read it? Ba'aznehem, in their ears. Very interesting. All these words are said by Hakel, by the mitzvah of Hakel, by the king. So Chazal tell us, the rabbis teach in Gemara Sota, Shehaya Koran Melech, that the king would read from these words. Exactly it says, right? These are the words. Starting in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 1, the very first word, and onward until the end. Kivada yesh yachas v'dinyon beinehem. So he says there's actually a relationship, a similarity between our verse here and the mitzvah of Hakel, and we're going to do a lot of comparison. But in the meantime, what we do notice, in all the Torah, it always mentions Bnei Yisrael, even if it says Kol Bnei Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael meaning the children of Yaakov, the children, which we're going to explain as the masses, as opposed to Israel, which we don't know yet, but I'm already giving you a hint. It's talking about the leadership. So we're going to see that verse 1 and 2 is a statement that was to the leaders, and verse 3 onward is to the harmonim, the masses. And he's going to prove it. So he just really reiterates that question. Is it really possible that there's even a difference between the time that that Moses speaks to all of Israel or all of Bnei Israel? So now he's going to go in and says, it's really easy to hear. It's easy to understand. He's going to make it easy for you to understand. That every place that the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, are mentioned, it's always speaking about the masses, Hamon Am. Because all of them are the children of Israel. The children of Israel are the masses. But whenever it says Israel, it's speaking about Shebegedolim Shebe Yisrael, the leadership, the greater of Israel, because each one of them has the name of Israel, our Saba, right? Meir, you're a Saba. I'm also a Saba. A Saba means a grandfather. Believe it or not, I'm a grandfather. So you have here, each one of them, each one of the leaders has the name, like the essence of Yaakov, our grandfather, Yisrael, our grandfather, as a name, like a nickname, and they're also similar to him. Why? Okay, because what is it about the leadership? The leadership has responsibility placed on them to rebuke the people. They have an obligation to guide, steer, and correct when people are going off the path. And guess what happens? Oh my gosh, listen to this. This is like Logic 101. Guys, you got to be sitting down for this. If they fail to give rebuke, they fail to give rebuke. They fail to be true leaders, whether by example or opening their mouth. The guilt of the people is hanging on them. We know the verse, right? You have to love your neighbor as yourself. You surely have to give rebuke. And if you don't give rebuke, the verse says, you carry their sin. If you do not rebuke, you carry the sin of the people. It says so in the Bible. So what do we have here? That a leader who fails to do his job, he carries the guilt. And that's why Moses is giving them, with a lot of fervor and passion, the laws, or let's say the guidance of how to give rebuke. He's about to die himself. And guess one of the first lessons, the best lesson he can give, is when do you give rebuke? Right before you die. We're going to see why. Why? And why does he feel the need? Because what people would normally do is they would find a space, to exempt themselves from the punishment of not giving rebuke. Why? They would say, we know they're not going to listen to me. I mean, come on. How many leaders do you know that keep their mouth shut because they say the people are not going to listen? So why should I open my mouth? Guess what? That's wrong. I'm telling you, if there's a leader out there listening to me right now, I'm telling you, get off your butt and give tochacha. But of course you have to learn how. So you got to give it a lot of respect. You have to give it with love and respect. But you have to give it. Okay. So they would say, to try to get out of being punished, they would say, we know that they're not going to listen. It's not going to help. It's not going to help. And you know why? Because these people have a stiff neck. Huh? Stubborn. Right? It's a stiff-necked people. They're stiff-necked. You know that being stiff-necked can have a positive side too. But okay. Now, it was already known to God. God himself called them stiff-necked. So what do you want from us, they're going to say? Guess what? Jeremiah comes and he says, look at Jeremiah 2, verse 8. I think you can find that on page 4, the top, number 3. What does it say? It says, the Kohanim lo amru hey Hashem. The priests, the Kohanim, did not say, where's the Lord? I'm not so sure that it's a question mark. But what's the priest's job? The priest's job is to teach the people. Okay? And they didn't say, where's the Lord? And those who hold on to the Torah, okay? The Tofsei Torah lo yidanu? Are you kidding me? The people who hold on to the Torah didn't know God? They didn't know me? And the Roim, the shepherds, Pishubi, they rebelled against me, God says. And the prophets, the Nevi'im, Navu, Babal, the prophets were prophesying by idols. And this is the point. Achre lo yi'ilu halochu. That, you know who the people were following? Bad leadership. The leaders were of no avail. They followed what does not, they were not assisting the people. The job of the rabbi, the job of the judges, the job of the king, the job of the people who are in leadership position are to raise the people up, to be raised up. So what were they doing? So you can see there's guilt. The prophet Jeremiah is placing guilt on the leadership for not giving rebuke. So what do we see? Shetalo ha'eder tochacha b'tainish lo yoyelem kilo avu shema. That the guilt, right? They hung the lack of tochacha. Jeremiah hung the lack of the rebuke as a claim that it wouldn't help them because their claim was they're not going to listen. The truth is, it's not a good claim. You're just speaking nonsense. I have a good example. Chizkiyahu Melech. Hezekiah, the king, he got very sick. And Isaiah comes to him and he says, you know, you're going to die because you're a sinner. Well, what did he do? He never got married. He never attempted to have children. He didn't attempt to have children. And you know why? Because he had Ruach HaKodesh. Meir, he had Ruach HaKodesh. He had a sense of prophecy and he said, I'm going to have a very evil child. I don't want to get married. Guess what? Isaiah says to him, what, are you smarter than God? God told you you have 613 commandments. You have to get married. One of them is to get married. Another one is to have children. Hello? What, are you smarter? You're playing God? No. You have to get married. And guess what? He said to Isaiah, I want to work out the best possible chance of not having an evil kid. I want to marry your daughter. Isaiah agreed. They still had an evil son. Didn't matter. It was Menashe. And he himself killed Isaiah. It was the king, Menashe, that killed his grandfather, Isaiah. So you have it there. You heard it. That Isaiah says to him, you still have to do your obligation. Don't worry about the results. That's not for you. That's for God. So you have to still rebuke. You don't have to worry whether it's Now, you have to worry you have to do it in the most effective way. You want to be heard. You want to be listened to. Not because it's you, because for the glory of God. You need to think of the most effective way. And it could be the most effective way is to ask someone else to do it. If you're not on good terms with the guy, or he doesn't like the way you look, then you're not the guy. But you should try to make sure that, and we're going to see other ideas, mainly the main idea is to do it in a hinting fashion, just like Moses does it here. Number one, close to the day of your death, and we'll see why, and also in a hinting fashion, and we'll see why. We don't know yet why, but we do know you cannot escape. Therefore, he says, Ki al kol panim hamochiach yazeh shelo. The one who gives rebuke fulfills his obligation. Mikol makom, nevertheless, limed otam derech hatochacha. Guess what? Moses is teaching them how to give rebuke. Why does he need to teach them? Ki kol mochiach. Anybody who gives rebuke, haroitz yum devarim nishmoyim v'lo yiv'atu b'tochachto. Anybody who gives rebuke, his desire, he wants that his words should be heard, and that the person he's giving rebuke to does not rebel by kicking back, as we all do. Come on, we're all flesh and blood. Someone comes and tells us, you know, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. The more refined we are, the more not only willing are we to hear what someone has to say about how we can improve, but we'll go out of our way to find out. We'll even ask people, what can I do to improve? Right? That's the highest level one should be on. Then, if you don't want your rebuke to go unnoticed, as yokichen beremez, the way to give rebuke is through a hinting way, a nice way, a soft blow, so to speak, v'lo b'perush, but not explicitly. Bofen shelo yavin devarov, in a way that the person you're speaking to, remember, it might even be public, and you're not mentioning any names, you're mentioning a particular member of camp. They used to say, something went missing, so everyone will, in 2 hours, we'll check back and see if it's put back in its right place, and we'll forget that it ever happened, right? Something like that. So you want to, only the person who is guilty will understand on his own that he's the guilty one, and he'll feel it and understand it on his own that he's the person being talked about. But to give rebuke in a revealed fashion, most likely the result is the person is going to kick back and attack, and it's not effective. Okay, and that's why Kadosh Baruch Hu actually says to Moses, right, regarding Hakel, that the Torah should be read. Sheyikara HaTorah Hazot. That what is the Torah? The Torah itself are words of Musar, words of ethical teachings. Like in this Parsha, they are what? Neged. The word Neged Kol Yisrael. In Vahakel, it says Neged Kol Yisrael. Why Neged? What's the word Neged mean? It could mean opposite, right? Opposing. But even that means there's friction. And these are tough words. Mul means in front of. Opposite, it really means in front of, right? Say these words in front of, but they didn't use the word mul as opposed to neged. Neged means like your wife is your ezer kenegdo, your helpmate who's actually against you. Okay, this is when we get into marriage and all this lovey-dovey stuff. Your wife, and it works the other way around, is your greatest bird who's going to tell you what you need to do to improve your life. Because she knows, and he knows, the spouse knows, what goes on behind closed doors, how you really are. And therefore, they're a helpmate against you. There has to be friction, right? If your mate is one of those people who says, yeah, all the time, you're the greatest, you'll never change. In fact, we have the greatest story of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Akiva, Reish Lakish. And I don't know if I told you the story how they met, but how they met is a whole story on its own. I'm going to skip that for now because we don't have enough time. Look it up on the internet. We have Google. Look it up. The meeting of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Anyway, Reish Lakish married Rabbi Yochanan's sister. That's how the story either begins or ends, however you want to look at it. But what happens is Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish dies. And Rabbi Yochanan, at some point later on, after learning for, decades together, and Rabbi Yochanan's looking for a chavrusa, and everyone they give him and match him up with as a study partner, he's so upset. It's even making him more depressed. Every person he learns with basically agreed with everything he said. I mean, he was a great rabbi. You couldn't really argue with him. But that's not what he was looking for. He was looking for another Reish Lakish. Every time he opened his mouth, Reish Lakish always said, but that's what you say. How are you going to resolve that contradiction with somebody else says something else? Of course, he was able to. Whatever he said was able to resolve. But the fact that someone went against him, I don't mean like really against him, but against his thinking process to help refine. Because that's what the Talmidei Chacham, that's what the sages, iron as iron sharpens iron, which is, like in battle. It sounds like there's battle. If you ever go to a study hall in Jerusalem and you just hear the decibel level, it looks like they're arguing, but they love each other. And they come out as best friends because each one is trying to get the other one to heaven. You know what I'm saying? He's trying to help him get clarity to understand Hashem's mind, what the Torah is really saying. So that's our only hope, that we could also have neged in a real sense. So here, he spoke neged kol Yisrael. Why? Because all tochacha are harsh words, and they go against Israel. Okay? Hamitnagdim el kol Yisrael. And why is it said in their ears? Right? In the verse in Hakel, it says it was spoken in their ears. That's the first hint that it's all spoken about in a hinting way. As if you are speaking in a whisper. It doesn't mean literally a whisper, because you know that the king is speaking to as many people that came. It could be 100,000, it could be 600,000, it could be 1,000,000 people. So it says in their ears means in their ears, like as if you're whispering. And what does that represent? As if it's only entering into the ears of the person who actually knows himself that he's guilty of that sin. So, whenever these preachers or rabbis get up and start telling you, fire and brimstone, something's wrong, needs to be changed, everyone starts looking around, like, who's the guilty one? It's not me. But if you, we all do it. So, but you have to realize it's you, if it's you. It doesn't always have to be you, but you realize it could be you. So hopefully that's the sense that it's going into their ears, meaning into the person. And when it says, this also hints, when it says, these are the words which Moses shall speak to Kol. Remember we said, Kol what? Kol Yisrael. That represents the Gedolim, the leaders of the generation, who carry the name Yisrael. And what does he say to them? The places. He then told them a certain number of places. And what does that mean? This is what Moses is actually saying. Mimeni tiru, from me you will see. I'm teaching you leaders how to give rebuke. Kain ta'aseh, just like you see me do, you should do. Lahochiach beremez, you should give hintings you should give rebuke in hinting fashion, and that is the greatest reason to actually accept the rebuke, because when you realize the person is not coming to attack you, he's doing it out of love, and he's doing it out of respect, and making sure your own self-respect is intact. He's saying it in a hinting fashion, then it makes it so much easier to accept. Now, some will say, when we ever say Yosh Omrim, some say, it doesn't mean to contradict anything we said before, but it could be a whole other level. That it was specifically towards the leadership that are called Israel, that he spoke in a hinting fashion because of the honor that they deserve. But that's when verse 1. But wait, look at verse 3. It says he spoke to all the children, he spoke to Bnei Israel. That means the regular people, the Tom, Dick, and Harrys, right? The Joe Schmoes, the regular people, not the leaders, because he didn't need to portion any type of honor to them, but rather explicitly, he went ahead and he told them, about the actions taken by the spies and taken by the sin of the golden calf. He mentioned it explicitly. Why? See, even though the great leaders of the generation, they weren't actually guilty in all these matters in which he needed to speak in a hint. He spoke in a hint anyway. Let me just read that again. Right? Even though the greats, the leaders, most likely anybody weren't guilty in all the things that he spoke in a hinting fashion anyway, nevertheless, after the fact that, you know what they were guilty of? They never gave rebuke to the people properly. That's why he's teaching them. You may not be guilty of worshiping the golden calf, but you know what you're guilty of? Not giving rebuke to those who were, or right before they got involved, or as they were involved. Obviously afterwards, too late. But that's the guilt that is sitting on the leadership's shoulder, not giving rebuke. So he begins by saying, it appears to me to resolve the question that many Meforshim ask, many of the commentators ask. When you tell a story, what do? You start out, once upon a time, which means you give a date. Once upon a time is the date. Obviously, 7 years ago, whatever the story is, you start with a date. How come the date only appears in verse 2? Verse 2. 11 days from Chorev, actually 3. It was the 40th year in the 11th month on the first of the month when Moses spoke to the children of Israel. So you see right there. Why is it in verse 3? Shouldn't the story have started with the date? So he says something very interesting. Well, he asked the question. Lama lo nemar, why was it not said Vayihi bar arbayim shana, that it was in the 40th year at the beginning of the Parsha? Why wasn't it in the first verse? Because the real thing, lefi kol ikartam shel hoda'azman, the real reason and purpose to mention time, this time, tamo lahodia shehotochacha tov liot samuch lamisa, to actually teach over a very important lesson, that the best time to give a rebuke is close to someone's death, meaning Moses' death. And why is that? So that the person giving rebuke, he should not keep hounding them and giving rebuke after rebuke after rebuke. If you all know, you had children, you know you have to have rachmanut. They need time to process before you throw the next great lesson at them. So you give them rebuke, and then you wait and process, or even you're giving in hints till they get it. But no, many of us give rebuke after rebuke after rebuke. So if you give it right before you die, so then you're not going to rebuke after rebuke after rebuke, because you're finished. You took your last breath and finished. But also, what about the person who's getting it? So if you're giving it right before you die, so the person receiving it, well, what's the most likely response a person has when they're not ready to hear it? So if you say to somebody, you got a toothpick coming out of your forehead, their response is, you're telling me you got a beam. You got a beam coming out of your forehead. You're telling me I got a problem. You have problems much worse than me. And that's usually the response. So if someone is on their deathbed and giving you that kind of rebuke, you're not going to tell them, you're giving me rebuke. Look at you. You have bigger problems. You're not going to respond that way. You want to add something?
So just trying to figure out what the psychological deal is.
That's a famous Gemara in Erechim where it's Tol Korah. Okay, you can look that up. Did I skip something? Okay, that Shema Hayom Amachar Yelo Makom Lomar El Hamochiach, that what's going to happen is the person getting rebuked, perhaps tomorrow, the next day, he's going to say to the guy giving him rebuke, Tol Korah, which is you have this little splinter coming out of your forehead. You're telling me you got a beam coming out of your forehead.
I have a problem. I have a bigger problem.
Huh? Yeah, you have a bigger problem, right? So, davar rak hazeh, something as like, let's say nasty, something as evil as this, Imhu efshari lihimatzei etzel klal hamon am. That you can only find by the masses. You're not going to find that kind of speech and that kind of kickback, that kind of response from a refined person, a leader, when he's getting rebukicized, if that's a word, right? When you're giving a leader, if you would give a leader rebuke, he would accept it. He's refined, right? And what does he say? So only that kind of language of kickback would come from a lowly person. Anyone who is a very successful and active person, right, in terms of leadership, those kind of words would never come from him because he's refined, right? It says in our Ethics of Our Father, love rebuke, bring it on. What's the Vilna Gaon said? The whole purpose of life is to refine your character. So if someone comes and says, I think you could do a little bit of improvement in this area, at least have a dialogue. Why do you think that? Do you have any advice for me? I mean, what's the worst? Let it flow off your back. Sometimes people make things up and it's irrelevant. But at least hear what he has to say. Don't take it so personally. In fact, maybe it's even a godsend. It's easier said than done. Lefikach. Therefore, Tochacha Rishona, the first rebuke, which is the first two verses, it was only by the leaders. It was not necessary to write a date of before the death. Why? Because anytime, Tochacha Lahem Tova, obviously rebuke is acceptable to them, so it's good. You don't need to have this restriction for the leaders right before the person dies. Ki lo yibat lomar, because they will never respond negatively or kick back by saying you have a bigger problem than I do. Ki im ha'etzev nivza achuz bechevle buz. My translation, which I really like, and we'll see it kind of clear later on, is that misery loves company, right? If you have a low sense of self, those kind of people usually like to bring other people down to their level. So they're not like that. The kol ish yirei Elokim, anyone who has a healthy fear of God, lo yishma piv dibur kazeh, that will never speak such negativity. And furthermore, it's specifically the rebuke that was said specifically, right, explicitly, like the golden calf and the spies, only when that mentioned the 40th year and onwards. Because it's only the lower inferior people that you would be concerned that they would come back and rebuke after rebuke after rebuke and give such a response to the person of, who are you to tell me you got worse problems? But when it came to the first rebuke, it was said in a hinted fashion, and there was no concern for this, because each person, each great person was able to make himself, right? He was able to accept upon himself what was being said, and he acted like he didn't know. That's okay, because that's called saving face. You don't have to, in Judaism, we don't confess to other people. We only confess to God. So if someone gets up there and starts, telling the people what they need to do to change, you accept it. Of course, you can look around. Maybe it's not me, but inside you have to know and recognize what you need to change. And then an alternative answer, again, another level of understanding that first rebuke, that since it was Moses himself that said this, therefore he mentioned it in a hinting fashion because he was afraid lest what would happen? That he would be burnt with the coals, because he already got burnt before when the people acted up. What did he say in Bamidbar? Bamidbar is Numbers chapter 20, verse 10. That you can find on page 4, number 4. When Moses says, "Now listen, you rebels," that's not the way he was punished for this. Okay, so it's better when the leader who's giving the rebuke has a certain amount of dignity for the person giving rebuke. Don't say this, "Listen, you rebels." That got him in trouble. He got burnt. He wasn't allowed into Eretz Yisrael, into the Holy Land, because of that. So he learned his lesson. In fact, even next to it, if you just read on in our verse, it says Moses spoke to Bnei Israel like Kekol Asher Tziva Hashem Oto Alehem, just as God commanded. So we know, like I mentioned in the beginning, that Moses wrote, these are all his own words, but he understood this is the way God wanted. And that's why it says, just as God commanded him to speak to them.
Shabbat